The inclusion of years in the titles of video games has been around since the very beginning, but few games accurately predict the events of the years in their titles. But if you look deep enough, you will find a story unravel, a thread to follow. 1998 was the peak year for game developers putting years in the titles of their games. A game called Raid 2020 was released. This game was the very first cyberpunk-themed video game and can hence be forgiven for the lackluster graphics and quality. There's Formula 198 and there's Rogue Trip Vacation 2012, the game with the most confusing title and cover ever. Seriously, tell me what it's about. Huh? Tell me what the gameplay's like. You can't, can you? Turns out it's a vehicle combat game set in the post-apocalypse of 2012, where each driver competes to serve as a single tourist. Speaking of 2012, that's the year Sony released Wipeout 2048, which is a long-awaited sequel of the 2014 game 2048. In 1996, a multi-game arcade machine was released called Touchmaster 8000. The 90s were cool. Exactly half a century before 2048, the game Dune 2000 was released in 1998. This is the remake of the 1992 game Dune 2, which is based on the 1965 book Dune. Dune 2000 was planned to transpire in the same year as the 1999 game SimCity 2000, but since that was the year the building regulations of the Bulgarian province of Montana got reworked, they had to do a re-release in the form of SimCity 3000. Also in 1999, the World Wildlife Foundation took everybody by surprise by releasing their first ever video game in the form of WWF WrestleMania 2000. 23 years after the World Wildlife Foundation was founded in 1961, a game was released called 2010, the text adventure game. It was based on the novel and movie Space Odyssey, which was about a guy stranded in space on a spaceship. It wasn't a bad guess, but they were still a few years off.
And we all know that when the going gets tough, and it often does, the tough get going.
But not going home just yet.
2010 was also the year Capcom thought the last fight ever would take place with the release of Street Fighter 2010: The Final Fight, which is the predecessor of Final Fight 2, Final Fight 3, Mighty Final Fight, Final Fight Revenge, and Final Fight Streetwise. Anyway, Street Fighter 2010 released in 1990, which is also the year Geopolitik 1990 transpires. It's a text-based simulation strategy game where you play as the United States against the Soviets and was released in 1983, which is also the year a game called 1994, 10 years after, was released, which is a sequel to George Orwell's 1984 and takes place 10 years after the book. But there is also a game which describes events which transpire 100 years after the book called Robotron 2084, which was released in 1982. But first, going back to 10 years after the event of George Orwell's book, we have the release of a spy game where the missions are impossible, aptly named Impossible Mission 2025, where in the main quest line you attempt to buy a house on a single household income. This game was the long-awaited sequel to Impossible Mission, which was released in 1984, which was the year life in Norway was so exciting that they had to make a game about it called Norway 1985. The game will always leave the game community confused since it was just about things that have always happened in Norway, such as skiing and killing Soviets, but now in 1985. F12020 was released in 2020, which is also the year which the game 2020 Super Baseball, released in 1991, takes place. This game predicted that baseball was so boring, the only way people in the future would watch it was if it was played by robots. Unfortunately, that's not the case yet, and baseball is still equally boring to watch, but still, not a bad prediction for a 1991 game, which is by the way exactly a decade after the release of Earthquake San Francisco 1906, a game which claims to be about the largest earthquake ever on the US West Coast. However, it seems like this claim will be refuted, as there are rumors your mom is planning a road trip to LA next year. Dates in video games even became political with the 1999 game Malvinas 2032, which takes place 50 years after the Falklands War, a conflict between the UK and Argentina where 900 people lost their lives fighting over a barren piece of land, of which the only Google Street imagery seems to be from a guy who got lost at sea. The game was terrible and a clear propaganda piece by an Argentine game company.
Oh, bloody hell! Afirmativo! Afirmativo.
But it has its piece in history as one of the first Argentine games, alongside other contemporary titles such as Yo! Matias.
Afirmativo.
The events of Malvinas 2032 preceded the storyline of Metro 33 Wars, which was released in 2014 and is set in the underground community built in the ruins of a metro system after Moscow was destroyed. Plausible. The game released in the same year was Farm Machine Championships 2014. The game expects you to win the championship plowing, which is simply ridiculous because in 2014 the real winner of the reversible final plow-off was Peter Alderslade from East Bolden. And not you, bitch.